things aren't getting better in the community. Every day we have more and more cases, right? More positive cases. And we have so many people who are isolating, waiting to be tested to see what the outcome is going to be because they were contacts of positive people. Many people from our community are doing a lot of traveling. And some of the traveling that they're doing is into the United States, which, as we know, is the most infected country in the world. And we have to take measures and steps to ensure the safety and security of Kahnawake. That's our main concern. That's our responsibility. And along with it being the responsibility of the task force, we also need people from the community to comply and to be responsible. So the new directive speaks to the border crossing issue, and that's a huge issue for the community. So the Canadian Quarantine Act says that if you're coming back to Canada after traveling across the border into the United States, you must quarantine for 14 days. Essentially what will happen is people who cross into the United States and then come back to Canada and who fail to do their 14-day quarantine will be and can be dealt with at a higher level of enforcement. So we can now issue fines. People can be charged as well here in the community under our emergency preparedness law. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to comply. We want to be partners with everybody in the community, but if people don't want to comply and if people can't be a good partner, then they leave us no other alternative but to respond to them with a higher level of enforcement. So that's what will be happening. And now that we're moving into the holiday season, we know that people are going to be gathering. We're trying to stress to them how important it is not to gather, to stay away from each other. I know that sounds kind of cold, but I mean, we're in a difficult time. To quote Lloyd, we're in a dire situation and we need to make sure that we can mitigate the effects of coronavirus. Well, the fines are laid out in the law. So the fine is $1,000, but with all of the additional costs that go with it, the fine to an individual will be $1,541. This is enforcement within our community. At the same time, people who cross the border are still beholden to the Quarantine Act. So that doesn't preclude them from getting a call from the border agencies or the RCMP or anybody who's been tasked with enforcing that act, right? So they could still receive fines. They could still be charged under that act as well. So those fines are fairly substantial, right? So the maximum fine for someone who's contravening the Quarantine Act could go up to $750,000, right? And 6 months in jail. And if somebody fails to follow the Quarantine Act, goes to the United States, comes back, doesn't quarantine, they end up getting someone sick, for example, or they cause an outbreak because they failed to follow the rules, then they could have a fine up to $1 million and 1 year in prison, right? It's and or, so you could be hit with both. It just depends on the circumstances. You know, any individual in our community that ends up in that situation, they'd have to go through probably a long drawn out court process, and that would be on them. You know, and if they decided to go through that whole process, you know, they'd get an attorney, that type of thing. There's a huge cost involved. So every single time you hear me speak about these issues, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a partnership with the community. We want to do it by community policing means. And what that means is developing a relationship with the community and saying, hey, listen, these are the things that you need to do to be safe and secure, you know, and we're hoping that people follow along. We're hoping that people are going to be responsible. But if people aren't going to be, you know, and now that the situation is, you know, dire, then they leave us no other alternative but to use higher levels of enforcement. And that means fines. It could mean charges, you know, all of those things. And really, we need people to go along with us and be our partners. That's it. Simple.